You're listening to Chaos Public Radio.
Good afternoon, wonderful listeners. Sit back and relax and enjoy Gender Non-Conformity Chat. I'm Mary Jane Blank, your host, and for this introductory episode, I would just like to describe where I'm coming from here, sort of my experience being gender non-conforming, where I am now, and sort of my journey. So, my journey began and in the fall of 2010, when I was about 22. Among the first trans people I met out of college were all non-binary, and my friend lived with them while I was finishing college still, finishing my undergrad. And so, she spent like a year or two there, and learning a lot about the functions in our society of power and privilege, the how we have like unquestioned intrinsic biases that if we don't question them, like our perception of reality is different if we don't question these assumptions. That was a big part for me. It was like suddenly like the world had opened up to me and become a totally different place. And so I started out. I'm a AMAB, for the uninitiated, assigned male at birth. And so I was given a certain set of societal expectations as a child, and my family expectations of what it means to be a boy or a man, and they were not the same at all. You know, society in the 90s, it felt very much like my brother was the archetype of masculinity, being a football player, being buff, while my dad was like the archetype of the new masculinity, the intellectual, the person who does everything for themselves, doesn't ask for help or really be that accepting of it. And so those were sort of the ideas I was presented with. And they never quite fit for me, obviously. And I always felt a little off about it. In high school, I wanted to be a woman, but I didn't know it, and like I would say things, but I always thought it was impossible. So it took me until that time in my 20s where I learned that, like these unquestioned assumptions, like once you can question them, like suddenly it did not become impossible to be a woman. You know, suddenly it became totally possible, and to be outside of the binary. And so in like December of 2010, I went online and I looked up non-binary, genderqueer identities, because those were the folks I met first. People who queered gender, not just necessarily neutral, but are like sort of pushing it in different directions, sort of being masculine and feminine at the same time, being a masculine of appearance but feminine in manner or affectation, and vice versa. A lot of different forms of gender nonconformity and genderqueer, non-binary people and identities. And so for me, for a long time, I have identified with sort of an androgyny ever since that point, where, like, I fit, basically, like, how I conceive of gender is that there's like, different ways of looking at it, and every way you look at it gives you different kind of results, based on, like, different conclusions based on those things. So, looking at it as just the societal expectations and of, you know, what it means to be a man, or what it means to be a woman, or what it means to be masculine or feminine. And I feel like I have always felt like I fit in the middle there somewhere. So I identified outside of the binary for a few years, until I had to accept that, like, I do identify with that genderqueer identity, and that idea that, like, gender expression is also a false binary. That we know that gender identity and sex is a false binaries, where biological sex, we know now, is not simple. It's a very complex thing, and gender identity, as well, is actually very individual, so thus also very complex. Like, it's hard to make a overriding true statement about, like, quote-unquote gender as a whole. Like, you can make comments about how society perceives it or what the expectations are, but you can't really quite pin down exactly what it is. Every single person has their own definition, and it is 100% valid to them, just as mine is to me. And that's sort of one of the points I want to make through this cast. I want to talk to other folks who are non-binary and gender non-conforming, and genderqueer, and, you know, see how they think about, how they perceive it, their genders, and sexuality. So, I first became pansexual before I realized I was genderqueer, before I went online and researched it a little bit. Now, this is, like, literally before Tumblr. Like, this is like Tumblr was a month old when I was doing this. So, like, I definitely got into the whole Tumblr trans community, non-binary thing, for a while. And that was pretty influential. Definitely was a big part of... It's just like a relationship I was in at the time, where it was both very accepting and very open-minded, but at the same time very limiting, and there were a lot of other issues. Like, it took having to come out to my mom to get her acceptance, coming out to her as a woman, to accept it myself, and to start taking, you know, realizing that I am transgender, I am transsexual, that I can accept that. Like, transsexual is kind of an old term where transgender kind of replaces it, but transsexual in that I'm taking hormones and I want to get surgery, and, like, the only problem I have with the two terms is that too often transsexual is used as being, oh, we're the true transes, while folks who are non-binary, like myself, was, or am, you know, because I'm both simultaneously. I'm not non-binary, I guess. I'm genderqueer and a woman simultaneously. You know, I both identify with womanhood and I identify with genderqueerness. I identify with having a more... I don't know how to define it exactly. It's actually really... That's why I kind of wanted to ask the question, right? What does it mean? So, yeah, mostly... So, for me, mostly, the reason why it's not so important as, like, a straight-up identity for me is that it is more about expression and about perception, you know. So I'm considered to be very androgynous as I am now, just getting back on hormones, and so I have, like, stubble, and I get perceived as, like, androgynous. I get perceived as sort of like, oh, people have to ask each other, and people have misgendered me in front of me, which is weird, because I go by Jane, but, like, whatever. I guess if I went by Mary Jane, it wouldn't be as big an issue, but that's more my professional name, full disclosure. It's definitely a Clark Kent, Superman kind of situation, you know? Anyway, so, yeah, it's complicated. It's hard even for me to talk about, where it's, you know, this is something I thought about a lot. This is something that's part of my lived experience, so, like, the biggest thing about that was, when I first came out as genderqueer, my mom's immediate reaction was, quote, 99.9% of people will not know what you're talking about. And I, like, was just sort of agape, because I'm online on Tumblr at the time, and I know, like, a dozen people who are, you know, and so being told no one will accept me for this didn't really do anything for me. It did not make me feel good about her or about myself, and, like I said, it sort of took me coming out as a woman for her to understand me, and for me to sort of understand what the full scope is of myself, too. Because, yeah, like, I think I'm fortunate that I've always been kind of, androgynous, so that I don't have to be hyper-feminine, you know, to be accepted. I just am a woman. I just have feminine, mannerisms, you know, but I you know, I dress like a metalhead. I wear all black, you know, and it's an androgynous outfit, even though metalheads are associated with masculine and, identities and men. Women in metal look exactly the same. They wear the same outfits. You know what I mean? It's like, it's a, and, like, same thing with, like, nerd culture. And it's so funny, like, when I was in college, identifying as a man dating a woman, where we dressed exactly the same, except all of her clothes were tailored to fit her body in a different way, and I thought it was so absurd. that I was considered masculine or whatever for, like, wearing baggy jeans, which I didn't really have much choice over, you know, and I definitely changed a lot there. Anyway, so despite this all seeming like very mundane things, this is actually a little emotional for me. So, yeah, this is complicated. This is why I want it to be more of conversations, which is why by myself this is introing it is kind of hard. Because I want to hear other people's perspectives. So my perspective on sexuality is that in my perfect world, it wouldn't matter. It would be a moot point. It doesn't, like, because ultimately, the way we define sexuality as being about gender attraction is completely useless for actual real-life attraction. Because in real life, you're not attracted to a gender, you're attracted to people. You're attracted to aesthetics, you're attracted to attitudes, you're attracted to personalities. You can make a list of everything you're into down to, like, genital preferences and things like that, and you can find somebody who would be interesting to you. You know, you want a feminine woman with a penis, you can find that. You want whatever, it's all out there, you know? Like, every combination of these things exists. Like, you want someone super masculine who is also a woman, but also trans? That exists. You know, it's all out there. So point being that, like, so when I identified as genderqueer, before I'd always identified as straight, because the truth is that I was bisexual, but never could admit it to myself. And once I identified as genderqueer, the idea of, like, gay and straight became completely useless to me. Because it's like, how do I... If gay is defined as being attracted to the same gender, or men attract to men and women attracted to women, and straight is being attracted to the opposite gender, or men being attracted to women, and women being attracted to men, vice versa, then how does a genderqueer person fit into that? You know, not even being a part of the equation, where really, what it made me realize is that, like, those distinctions are really just, like, normal and almost normal. Sort of the distinctions end up being more about the sphere of like, most acceptability, and now, we're expanding that sphere, but obviously a lot of my, folks like me are left out of it, and obviously not even considering class and race privilege here, you know? Like, just people are gender non-conforming, and trans, especially transgender folks who don't fit into the transsexual narrative, you know? That's why, like, I shouldn't even have used the term, really, but... Because, like, a non-binary person who never takes hormones or anything like that is just as transgender, just as trans as I am, or as anybody else. And don't let anyone tell you otherwise. That's the other part of the show, is I really just want to normalize these things. I really just want people to understand that being non-binary, being genderqueer, being gender non-conforming is just another perspective, that there's nothing fundamentally different about... Like, there's nothing... like, really, like, the realm of normality can easily fit all these identities and all these people, and that the only reason it doesn't is just because of systems of control and power, and how those systems have been traditionally and historically gendered, so that it's about this male-dominated masculine control system, and sort of the feminine as subservient. And obviously this is a very modern Western conception of it, looking back, but that's sort of what people want me to... what they want you to believe is the traditional thing. But obviously that's, again, Eurocentric, where other cultures have more than two genders. There isn't a binary in other places. Some places have more, like, trinaries, some are more complicated, and I'm not really going into any of that. I would rather find people who are from those places and talk about it themselves, so I'm just gonna leave it at that, that vague. But, so, sexuality, what does it mean? Like, how do you define it? So, like I said, the way we define sexuality is totally pointless, totally useless. Nobody is attracted to everyone of a gender they're attracted to, you know? And, like, bisexual people are not attracted to everybody. Nobody is. Like, people have aesthetics and things that they like. And it's so much harder to define it because it's complicated, really. And it's individual. And, honestly, like I said, it shouldn't even be an issue. It should just be a non-issue if it wasn't for all these, methods of control. Because, like, it really shouldn't matter whether or not, you see a man and a woman together. It really doesn't matter what their sexualities are. It only matters in our world because if those two are bisexual, they are actually repressed by, they have, like, disadvantages because of that. Even though, from an outward perspective, they might seem like straight or whatever. So where I've come to now, like I said, I'm a genderqueer transgender woman, and my sexuality ends up being complicated. So the best way to describe it is more like I'm a bisexual lesbian. So by that I mean that, like, I'm attracted to people of any gender, really. I'm attracted to, like, I have physical attraction to anybody, but because I'm also demisexual, which means, like, I can really only have sexual relations with somebody if I think that there's, like, romantic potential. And so, I have had sex with men before, but only with their girlfriend, and stuff, like, only with a woman present. And, so basically, if you take, attraction as romantic attraction and sexual attraction, I'm romantically attracted to women, mostly. I would say probably non-binary folks as well, but I just haven't met as many that have fit that for me as much as women have, and it doesn't matter so much. Like, that's just sort of how it is. So yeah, point being that it's more useful for me to identify as a lesbian because I'm only going to have serious relationships with women in my life, romantically, where I am also bisexual just as much, but like I said, it, like, really won't come up. It's like, there's no men I'm gonna pursue in my life, because I'm attracted to queer men as well, and so being a woman, being attracted to queer men is always weird. But yeah, and also from not realizing I was trans, but always feeling that awkwardness of that, that alien body feeling. Like, I always was more interested in bisexual folks because they don't care. It won't matter. Like, basically all the things, all my hang-ups are totally irrelevant. And so those are the only people I've dated my whole adult life. Yeah, it's all, like, bisexual, pansexual, anyway. I could get into the whole pan versus bi. I don't care which you use. It doesn't matter, as long as you don't fight with the other side. That's all I care about. If you're pansexual, don't shit on bisexuals and vice versa. Anyway, so that's my ramble about being gender non-conforming. So where am I at now? I consider myself sort of like I said, in sort of the middle, little femme of center, kind of right in the center of androgyny. Pretty much, I don't know, I'm a woman and I get perceived as a woman a lot. But like I said, because of other secondary sexual characteristics, it gets vague. My favorite story about this, of course, was the first time I was on hormones. I was working in DoorDash, and I knock on someone's door, and I was wearing makeup a lot at the time, too. And this guy looks at my face, looks at my tits, looks at my crotch, because I was also wearing a bra. And so, like, he just, like, could not decide what my gender was. And it was just that 3-point, because it was, like, look at my face, and then he was, like, stop, nope, stop. And it was just so awkward, like... It's the only context where, like, because I expected things like that to happen. It's the only context where someone, like, in public, being trans is so weird. It's the only, like, identity set where people can stare at your crotch or talk about your genitals in public, and somehow it's acceptable. It's really messed up, but fortunately I haven't had that experience too much, but if you have, fuck, that sucks. Oh, anyway. That's most of my history with this stuff. I am Mary Jane Blank once again. Thank you so much for listening to this introductory episode of the Gender Non-Conformity Chat on Chaos Public Radio. Please support the show by going to ko-fi.com/chaospublicradio or patreon.com/chaospublicradio and consider sponsoring us to get more of this queer content. And additionally, if you are gender non-conforming yourself, if you are a butch woman, a femme man, if you consider yourself androgynous, if you're non-binary or genderqueer, or you consider yourself agender, shoot me an email at chaospublicradio@gmail.com, and and you might be on the show, of course. It all is what it is. I'm still figuring all this out. So, for now, Mary Jane Blank, please like, share, and subscribe.